Whether you're new to drawing or an expert who needs to polish up, there's always new methods to help you improve, and this method is genius. Mainly because it encompasses every stage of an illustration and there's not a lot to learn in order to execute it. Now, you might be wondering what this method is and how it will improve your art. Well, it's all about strokes, and it's called the drawing vocabulary. Learning to draw can overload us with so much information and so many techniques that we forget what the basics are. But instead of thinking in basic terms like lines, shapes, volume, and dimension, we're going to cover the 8 common strokes you would use when holding a pencil. And once you master this vocabulary of strokes, the rest will come automatically, making for a much easier process. And here they are: hatching, cross-hatching, side strokes, stippling, scribbling, curved hatching, rough shading, and contouring. Let's go through these one at a time as a reminder on how to use them properly. And stick around because we're going to combine all of these strokes in order to show you how well they work in creating a full image. One of the most common forms of shading is hatching. A lot of beginners see this in illustrations and so they copy it, but they don't necessarily know how it actually works. Instead of just doing fast and loose lines that are parallel, like this, you should understand how to hatch like a professional. The golden rule here is consistency. The lines need to be evenly spaced, because evenly spaced lines when viewed as a whole creates the illusion of shadow, and that's what hatching is used for. The only time you should deviate from evenly spaced hatching is when showing differences in that shadow. For example, you can start introducing more space between the lines as the light increases and the shadow decreases. This creates a transition from dark to light. Alternatively, you can do the same with the length of your hatches. Hatches that grow longer will show you that a surface is a slight curve or angle, whereas hatches that are short will show you that a surface is sharper or has a harder edge or corner. The same rule applies here. You need evenly spaced, consistent lines, and you should consider transitions to light and surface geometry. But cross-hatching as a general rule is used to create darker shadows. It breaks up the composition of an image much more. If I wanted to show shading on this building, I would use normal hatches. But inside the building should be much darker than outside where the sun is, so I cross-hatch these areas that require heavier shadow. It just creates an additional layer of shading that distinguishes one hatch from another. Side strokes. This is one of the first things you learn when you start to shade images. Turn your pencil or pen to the side and use the side to shade instead of the point of the pencil. Naturally, the point creates sharper, thinner lines, whereas the side of the pencil creates a thicker, more uniform stroke. You can either use this technique in place of cross-hatching, or you can use it to show volume, much like contouring. Here's an example with a circle being turned into a sphere. Stippling is a drawing technique in which areas of light and shadows are created using nothing but dots. The basic idea is simple with this one. For darker areas, you apply a greater number of dots and keep them closer together. For lighter areas, you use less dots and space them apart. Here's the transition of a shadow from dark to light. You might notice that most of the strokes we're covering in this video are specific to shading and shape, and that's your first lesson. The composition of any illustration is 90% light and shadow and 10% line work. That's because in the natural world, there is no lines. There's only transition from one shape to another. And that's why the most famous artworks on Earth use light as the primary source of illustration. In saying that, lines are still important and stylistic. I love lines even more than shading, but half of these strokes give you the tools to manipulate light and create three-dimensional images within your lines. Next up, we have scribbling. I don't particularly use this one, but a lot of people do, and it is primarily stylistic. Scribbling can create the illusion of asymmetry and non-conformity. Say you have a surface that is rough and uneven. Hatching and shading would be extremely inefficient at showing that non-conformity, so the chaotic randomness of scribbles can really help with that. Don't let the negative connotation of the word scribble deter you from using this one. It can be useful sometimes. Curved hatching. This is a technique I don't see a lot, but it is also powerful. Keep even spaces again when you're using curved hatching, but this time curve them to follow the shape and volume of the object that you're shading. Curved hatching is more about volume and contour than it is about separating pieces of composition, but it's super useful if you're hatching curved objects. Rough shading. This is probably the first type of shading you ever attempted, and you probably still use it a lot of the time. I know I do, and there's nothing wrong with it. It can detract from final drafts and completed artworks, but rough shading is perfect for sketches, proof of concept, speed, efficiency, and practice. Let's be honest, 90% of our drawings are practice drawings. I'd rather be rough shading 90% of the time than spending extra effort on illustrations that will go unseen. So don't stop using rough shading, just know when to use it and when not to. And last but not least, we have contouring. Similar to hatching or curved hatching, contouring also requires even spaces between lines, but the lines themselves are often long and unbroken. This is to create the effect of curved space, and should primarily be used for creating volume on curved surfaces. This is the one stroke that is not a lighting technique, and yet it creates the same outcome. By creating curves on surfaces, you're making objects three-dimensional, and that's really the reason that people work on shading and lighting, to create an additional dimension. So if you love 2D line work and you want to add depth to your art but you aren't really into shading or hatching, contouring might be for you. Now that we've covered the 8 major drawing strokes that make up the drawing vocabulary, let's put it into practice and see just how much it changes an image. I recommend using 3 or 4 of these strokes per image, depending on what's required, but I'm going to use all 8 for the sake of covering this entire method, and here it is. When you combine these 8 strokes, or just 3 or 4 depending on your artwork, your drawing will start to look much more professional than if you only relied on 1 or 2 of these strokes, as most beginners do. So don't forget to widen your drawing vocabulary, and if this video helped you, give it a thumbs up and share it around, and subscribe if you haven't. I share weekly videos to inspire your creativity.